All right. Um, Welcome, everybody. It is time for whatever time zone you're in. We're very happy that you're here. We will wait a few seconds because I see the numbers piling up and more people joining for today's webinar. Already a warm welcome from my side. I'm Nicolai Schättgen, the CEO of Matchmaker Ventures, and jointly with me is our co-host with whom we're doing this together from our little Christoph Uferer.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Fantastic. We do have a very tight agenda, so I don't have time to wait for long for those who are not making, but also if you're missing the first few minutes, I guess that's the least or the most you can actually miss because it's only going to get a lot better from here. Let me brief you, welcome you to today's webinar, the Network API Advantage today and tomorrow. A very exciting 75 minutes or 74 to be exact now still ahead of us. And we hope that we will address a lot of questions, resolve uncertainties, bring clarity and lay the foundation for really upcoming growth in a super exciting growth era in the telecom and the wider ICT industry as such. Why are we here? My name is Nicolai. I'm the CEO of Matchmaker Ventures. We scale innovation. We find the best scale-ups in the telecom ecosystem and help to grow them internationally. Thereby, of course, we focus on growth markets where we see a lot of opportunities, and the network API is one of those markets where we see a lot of opportunities for the telecom industry as such, and also a lot of more players to really capture new value that is being created by technology and also by use cases, by needs that we see and that we will discuss today. We also believe for that market that scale is essential. Absolutely, the more the merrier. And therefore, we also actively participate in market building activities as today. We hope that we create a lot of value, that we answer questions. And in that regard, I'm already highlighting there's a Q&A function which will be live. So please post your questions. We will either try to address them directly in the discussion, or also I encourage my panelists and co-presenters here today to just answer them in the chat as we go. If we miss anything, we'll try to answer them after this discussion today. Sharing sharing my screen very briefly. Today, what can you expect? A brief introduction to be done by my colleague and the co-host for today, Christoph, in terms of what are network APIs and why do they matter. We'll then go on a first fireside chat of use cases and the size of the opportunity today, which I have the honor of moderating. Then we go into a second fireside chat and looking a little bit beyond the ecosystem play. How can I build the market of tomorrow? Because clearly we are still at the very early stages of a exciting new opportunity, not yet even a market, probably just going and getting into there, trying to get a few answers in that regard. And then we'll try to wrap it up, specifically focusing on what is today, what is really fact, what is already available, what is already possible, what is already needed on the market, and then also what is the future, what do we need to do in order to really capture on that promise what's out there. Why should you stay? I hope that the topic, that's why you're probably here, is exciting to you, but also we have, I believe, fantastic speakers. So we have the telecoms here, we have Otilia from Orange, we have Joe from Vodafone, we have Anup from T-Mobile, and then of course we also have from the association, we have George from the TM Forum, and we have also use cases, Thomas from Dimetor, and we also have Harpreet from Shabodi. So there's a lot of knowledge around this table. We will try to be as candid, as concrete, as critical and skeptical, but still as also optimistic as we are, to try to bring some answers to this market. And with this being said, a little bit over time, Christoph, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicolai, and also a warm welcome from my side. As Nicolai said, for the first 10 minutes or so, we want to lay a bit the foundation and establish a common understanding of what we actually mean by the network API market, what is the opportunity today, and where are we going. For that, let me share my slides. I see, Nicolai, that they are not running for me. Can you please reshare on your side? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good. With that, why do we see the growth now, and why do we think is the right time now to speak on this topic? And for us, the key point is we really see now over the last year, actually, so almost 24 months after Open Gateway and all the announcements, that there's actually a concrete set of use cases emerging that are fueling the demand for network APIs. So we see a market that is coming from a push, obviously through, as Nicolai said, the associations, the telcos, more and more to a pull where concrete use cases around immersive experience, drones, as we will hear in a bit, Industry 4.0 and what we call connected life are actually requiring operators and the overall ecosystem to expose network APIs to move to a different way of consuming and enabling connectivity and applications in the wider telco ecosystem. When we speak about network APIs, it's a very large term that encompasses a multitude of different API types and different API families that ultimately provide an API-based access to a connectivity infrastructure, to a compute infrastructure, or even more to a service or application. If you look at it very broadly and look into what is being currently done in GSMA Camara, what the operators are working on, and also where companies are seeking, or where there's demand emerging from hyperscalers, from enterprises, I think it's fair to cluster the network APIs in mainly three different pillars. First one is the market that is established, which was previously referred as CPaaS. We have a lot of traditional APIs around voice, SMS, OTT messaging, best effort data. So a market that has already emerged and where a concrete set of use cases is already there. If we take this one step further and really go into the direction of exposing network functionalities, we see a set of APIs that evolve around basically control and or status of network. You would have APIs around SIM swap, location, traffic prediction, network status. So everything that is more or less an information or request into a network. If you now look a bit more into the future, you see 5G APIs that are then really control functions of the network. The most prominent and most spoken about is obviously quality and demand, which is a triangulation of latency, throughput, and reliability to have more or less a defined network access. But then there's others around the edge cloud, traffic breakout, resource orchestration that help operators, but also enterprises to enhance their connectivity. So really a different set and different functionalities are being exposed. If we try to put this into a market, obviously, as Nicolai said at the beginning, it is an emerging market. And while obviously there's some numbers out there, we feel that the market, especially for 2025 and 2026, is showing a good traction. We predict that the majority of APIs also by 2030 will still be in the more traditional segment, voice, data, best effort, data I said before, but also SMS. And the network API market will build on top of that. Together, we think the market will be somewhere close to 30 billion by 2030. Now, there's obviously a magnitude of numbers out there ranging from 10 billion to probably the 100 of billions. I think it's always important to be considered in those numbers. But as a ballpark, we do think there's good traction in the market. We see the operators moving. We see a lot of the demand drivers moving. So we're confident that in 2026 and then more heavily in 2030, the ecosystem will emerge. Yet, and that's the main caveat, or one of the main caveats that we want to bring forward and also kind of leads to the title of today's session is this market, and this was always the common belief when GSMA Camara and Open Gateway and others were founded, was that this market can only emerge in this magnitude if there's a collaboration in the ecosystem. If there is a standardization of APIs across operators, if there's an alignment, at least fundamentally on roadmap, which APIs hit the market and with which quality parameters, only then there will be a supply side that is actually well equipped to serve the demand that is coming from the enterprises, the developers, the hyperscalers of today. Furthermore, for this market to be really kicking off, there's also the dimension of how can you actually make those APIs best accessible to developers. And there, I think we have seen many different approaches in the past, from operators having their own developer platforms to the intermediates, aggregators, to hyperscalers, and different developer types have found the right platform for their needs, have adopted to the SDKs they can best work with, have worked in the developer environments that they felt most comfortable with. We believe, and I'm curious to see what also we will discuss then in the fireside chats, that also on this level of developer engagement, a more holistic view of the ecosystem, a more aligned view on how these APIs can actually be made consumable to a wider audience will be absolutely critical. Otherwise, we'll see again a lot of fragmentation, and we will see breaking lines within use cases or between use cases that ultimately might limit the potential of certain network functions. When we now speak about collaboration, and it's actually pretty dominant now, and it is visible that this collaboration will happen. We today see two ways of the ecosystem moving ahead. And those are by no means mutually exclusive, but they should rather be seen as complementary. On the one hand, we have multi-local federation, which in simple terms means operators in a specific market agree to a set of APIs, agree to a certain set of roadmaps to allow local use cases and bring those use cases to the market swiftly and make them tailored to the specific demand points of this market. We see this in Spain, we see this in Germany, we see this in other markets where the larger operators are present and where the larger operators have a fair share of the market. So their multi-local federation makes a lot of sense. Yet, for this market truly to take off, global aggregation is surely one of the key propositions that need to be achieved by the ecosystem. What do we mean by global aggregation? We mean that there will be entities that aggregate the different APIs of individual operators into a single API and expose that to the environment to reduce the burden of the enterprise, of the hyperscalers, to integrate and aggregate themselves, but really connect to a single API that allows them to basically terminate into any operator in the world, into any country they want to serve their customers in. And while this is obviously a much larger endeavor, and it will require significant standardization and significant efforts of the operator community to come together and realize that, to us, this is the natural evolution of where it will go. But it needs also local steps, and for that, again, a multi-local federation is surely a good starting point, and it's great to see actually that this is already happening in selected markets. If we think about global aggregation, obviously the elephant in the room, and for us the real first step towards that was the creation of Aduna, where Ericsson and a set of global CSPs have joined forces, have put together a vehicle, a platform to enable this global aggregation and to ultimately foster and accelerate the go-to-market to serve the demand side with their requirements, and to have a true starting point in the industry that goes well beyond the current standardization initiatives around GSMA, Camara, Open Gateway, etc. And with that,
I think I did that mistake, actually. I think I pressed the wrong button, but I think I'm back on. Apologies for that one. I just realized that. Okay. Apologies. Oh, one time always has to happen. We go into the fireside chat number 1. Apologies, Christoph. I pressed the wrong button and I took you off stage too early. Too excited about to kick off the fireside chat number 1, where we'll drive into the use cases. Now we have heard there is money, there are opportunities, there is collaboration. Now it's all about how to really create that buzz and make money. With that one, I will call my panelists on stage. First, it's Thomas Neubauer, the co-founder of Dimetor, a use case company. We will have Harpreet, Geekee, also a co-founder of a scale-up in Shabodi. And then we have Otilia from Orange, who's a program director of the Telco API. So I think a very exciting panel on really answering or trying, let's put it that one, trying to answer in the next 25 minutes, 3 big buzz questions. There's the buzz. I want to understand, why is there so much buzz right now, right? So we will feel that, hey, there's everybody's talk about network APIs. What fundamentally changed that suddenly everybody's talking about it? So want to understand that one. Second, is there actual need? Because we talk about technology capabilities. Everybody was talking back in the 5G is going to be the bringer and the savior of the industry. And then somehow, where are the use cases? And of course, we also want to understand the game for the operators. So how can you really make money out of that one? I think I have all of the ingredients in hand. I'm excited. We have, again, we're tight on time, but I want to get maximum out of you guys. Harpreet, you're first. Shabodi, you founded the companies already a few years back. You're, if I may oversimplify, you're making it very easy to identify network capabilities, harmonize them and expose them so that they actually, like Christoph said, they need to be easily consumable so that they are easily consumable. What changed in the last 12 months, basically, so that everybody is so excited about the market? What is happening here?
So a few things happened. So when we started Shabodi, we were actually primarily focusing on the service product market, trying to take them into the enterprise world. But service products were not ready. Right? 5G, SA, and other marketplaces were not ready. But what triggered over the last 12 to 18 months is there's a realization that in order for us to move the service products from just being SIM card, device, data plan, call minutes providers, and to actually enhance the market capacity and the monetization strategy, they need to provide additional services and capabilities out there. And the consumption of that needs to be driven by the offerings that the service providers need to do, such as what Thomas is providing, the drones, the AGVs, the AR/VRs, the other applications that we've been talking about needs to become real. Using the network just as a pipe is not going to do it. There are bespoke needs. Christoph put it very well. He said connectivity fit for purpose. It's actually more than that, right? It's not only just connectivity fit for purpose. It's actually connectivity which can be utilized, monetized, leveraged, enhanced to provide a better user experience, to better provide the ROI for the enterprises, to provide the better capabilities out there. And that realization, that reality just started happening about 18 months ago, thanks to great minds like Otilia and Joe and everybody, and Anup and everybody else who are actually joining us on the panels today, right? The thought leaders are actually making that happen. And then certainly, Aduna, as Christoph very well stated, created a FOMO, right? Which is, okay, if they are creating this platform for aggregation, but service providers have not exposed those APIs out there, how are we going to actually capture the market together? So I think the stars are aligning. So this year in 2025, they said 7 planets aligned for the first time, right? Now the stars are also aligning properly to actually capture this market, actually make an impact that Christoph talked about.
Okay. Thomas, you're a little bit of the furthest away from the core telco, right? So you have a drone company, work in telecommunication, aviations, founded your company also already a few years back. From your perspective, network APIs, and I think there's even a lot of reports out there saying, hey, network APIs, a lot of developers don't think about telcos, and in here they think about different kind of networks. Network APIs, what does it mean to you, and what does it mean for your company? Does it change anything, the open gateway telco related network API discussion?
So first of all, we're not a drone company, but we are providing data to drone systems. But you're absolutely right. Historically, telecoms and aviation had nothing to do with each other. There was no interaction, there was no interface. And we see already with drones from first responder services, inspections, surveillance, even parcel delivery, it's becoming a reality. But in order to scale and automate those application cases in a safe and reliable manner, you need infrastructure in the airspace for communication. And even more importantly, you need information about that digital infrastructure in the airspace. And like you need wind and weather data for the approval and the operation of every single drone flight, you need data about your digital infrastructure and data that the telecom networks can provide. And this is where APIs of the network specific to the aviation industry and the aviation stakeholders are coming in and are actually demanded from the other side. So this innovation of drone services, this is happening at the intersection of these two major industries that had absolutely nothing to do with each other before.
Yeah.
Switch off the phone on a plane was the only interaction, and now you need data from telecom systems to make these aviation applications a reality. And that is where the API, where we are actually at an inflection point to generate these APIs and generate the data to make another industry successful.
And criticality, so they are fundamental for your business now, so without them it doesn't work, or
So
they are a game changer for you, they're changing the industry.
Right, so they're enablers. So some of this data is actually mandatory for aviation. What we are doing is we help telcos to provide such data because it's very aviation specific. If you think telecom is regulated, welcome to aviation.
Yeah.
If it's not certified there, it's just like not existing. So we help telcos to enable that, and we take away all the worries about how to deal with aviation systems to enable these APIs. And yes, some of this data is absolutely mandatory to scale drone operations in a safe and automatic manner.
Okay. Well, we'll drill down a little bit more what's possible already today and how much you're using them. Otilia, you're from Orange, one of the largest telco groups in the world. I think 26 countries where you actually have network operations active at the moment. And your title is Program Director for Telco APIs. So that means there's a program at Orange, right? So you take this serious. If I may ask, why?
We take it very serious, and we take it as a transformative opportunity for the telco industry to drive new business models and to give access to connectivity, to empower innovation on mobile applications and more across several industries. At Orange, at the beginning, we were one of the pioneers on camera and open gateway. So this initiative came from the technology sphere, but we have been driving it more and more closely in the past year from the business perspective, because there's always a question: is it a developer play or is it an enterprise play? The reality is that it needs to answer customer needs, so enterprise needs. So we want to make this accessible, to give levers for innovation for several industries, and at the same time to address customer needs and base our proposals on customer demand. So we work a lot with partners like Shabodi and other peers in the industry, and of course with Aduna, to provide simplicity and scalability to this. It's a cultural change and a transformative approach for the telco industry, and we hope to fully support the emerging market as Christopher was presenting earlier.
There was a lot of great words in there. I want to drill down on one, and also of course in Orange in France, you've launched some APIs together with the other operators in the market, and there's different paths to monetization. And in my simple terms, right, I see it quite simple. Either you can go directly to an enterprise customer and be almost a bespoke, which you hope and productize at some point, but it's an enterprise play. You can go country initiatives and then go jointly in France for the identification market, for the banking sector, etc. Or you have third, of course, the Adunas, the global aggregators, where you say, hey, I really hopefully bring this into the hyperscalers and they monetize that one really at scale and it's like a machine. How do you see those three monetization paths to each other? Are they all of equal importance, or how does it play? Where do you place your bets? Or you got to play because it's too early to call where it goes? How do you see that?
I think that one of the key points is making the APIs available. So they need to be accessible on all of those channels. That simplicity and consistency in terms of experience needs to be there in order to make this really easy to use by larger developer communities. So at Orange, our strong focus right now is enriching our API roadmap. We announced a project in France, but there are projects on multiple European markets at the moment. And at the same time, we're working together with several partners on how do we make the new APIs available at scale. So our first priority is developing the API business roadmap and in parallel addressing these multiple channels. So I think that talking about culture change, what changed is that we moved as telco industry from a vertical model to a much more horizontal, delayered one. And this API initiative is a full reflection on that. So it's realizing that to bring value at scale, we need to work differently. We need to be easier to reach and to be able to adapt in real time to customer demands. So we are trying to fuel this and put this into a proper product perspective.
All right. Harpreet, you work with a lot of operators, and also Christoph in the beginning, he said that there's 3 buckets of APIs, one more coming from the CPaaS world and different parts. What can be done, or what do you see also as you discuss with a lot of operators around the globe? What do you see is here already as APIs? What do you see as the next APIs? What's going to really change the needle, and what is really still, hey, they haven't figured out how to do this? So do you have for yourself a little bit of a classification of different APIs? Also maybe to help Otilia, hey, what should I put on this roadmap? What are the exciting APIs?
No, but I think Otilia was hinting on something very, very important, right? We definitely need a roadmap, and we need a roadmap to address all of these 3 monetization strategies that you need to do. One cannot live without other. So good example being, if we can have a global Camara API implementation for QoD, but if it has no value to Thomas in airline industry or in the aviation industry, or it has no value for my friends in Industry 4.0, because they just can't consume it the way it is, it's kind of good that it's there, but it's not good that it's not there. So the verticalization, i.e. the specialization for a particular industry, needs to be there as well. And then we know, thanks to Europe, the GDPR and all the compliance issues which comes within Europe, every region, every country, every there has its own issues, right? So or its own requirements. Issues are the wrong word, requirements. So in that particular case, you definitely need a regional collaboration as well. But to answer your question, I think we have some great service providers over here. We have Vodafone, we have Orange, we have, of course, T-Mobile, Anup, and those guys also joining in the later far chat. The issue is not about exposure. Issue is about monetization. Right? How do I actually build a business around this? How do I actually entice Thomas to go and say, hey, don't worry about this, we got it, right? We can take care of it. And by the way, here's some exchange of money which is going to happen so that Thomas makes some money, we make some money, Otilia makes some money, and of course, the aviation industry saves a lot of money by utilizing this kind of a stuff. Right?
Let's drill down on that one. There's also a question from Ashish in the chat. Thank you for that one, Ashish. Thomas, so how do the network APIs help you to make more money? Because at the end of the day, there's more people in the chain, right? You have the telcos in there, you have then also integrators, you have the Shabodis, there's software, there's a lot of players suddenly in the value chain. So where's the new money, Thomas? Is there new money that you have?
So again, we help telcos enable that, and we watch carefully whenever we help, for example, the telcos to monetize this. There are different approaches. And the approaches are like, the beauty is that this other industry called uncrewed aviation was not aware that telco can help.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, there is an industry coming up that has a demand for, I need this, and I need that. Oh, how do I get this? So I am responsible for the global standardization of these interfaces between telco and aviation for the last 7 years. So this is not happening overnight. So we have defined these interfaces and we have tracked what is the demand actually coming from the aviation side. Where are they willing to pay for it? Because it is an enabling technology for them. And how can they get that? How can they get that without having to worry about GDPR? How to get that data without, making it difficult because it's sensitive data. So this is what we have enabled, and by making it available, as Otilia said, it's still early days, hanging on with regulation in aviation, but aviation now is aware, and the aviation regulators, that practically you need that data to get approvals and to operate those things safely. So there is a business case out there. There's different approaches on how different telcos do it. Interfaces as a service, they package it into larger offers like, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, all the way to end-to-end possibilities. And the APIs as such are an enabler to get that done.
Yeah.
And if I may just add 1 second onto this, right? There's actually a huge values that has been created by Otilia, Anup, and a bunch of other people on the service product side of the house, right? Now, the thing is, the value is the ease of getting network services. That's what the value is. Of course, there are limitations based on network element providers on what they can do, the network capacity, network planning, network engineering. There are a lot of caveats. I give you that much, but there is a real tangible value, and there is a real tangible benefit for the consumer of that. For your case, Thomas, you need that information. You need it fast or slow, whatever it is. The issue is that the network information has value, and as long as we can identify the value, we can monetize it. The hard part is identification of that value, right?
Yeah, and I guess this goes to Otilia also to the culture change, right? Because this is a different market. What telcos have been, let's be nicely, have been challenged of developing new markets. Very good at scale, at of course billions of transactions in milliseconds, handling that one. So there's been a lot of things where telcos are good at. What has been challenges is building those new markets and developing them, sustaining them, and really then scaling them. So culture change. How do you address it at Orange? That you actually, hey, we have those skill sets to develop those new markets, to go for them, to have the capabilities to partner, collaboration, cross industry, cross country, cross globe, essentially. So how do you do that? Because that task seems rather big, to be honest.
We are trying multiple approaches. So from my perspective, one major step is that 5GSA is now becoming available on several markets, and 5GSA is by definition cloud oriented. So that changes fundamentally the way we operate and enable us to have a much more rapid pace of continuous integration, continuous deployment. So that operation model will also impact positively the speed of change that we can provide further on to our customers. Regarding your question, Nicolai, it's also, I think it comes with the realization that the purpose is not to try to address all possible use cases, but the need of focus. So trying to identify key verticals, key replicable situations, because that's how we drive scale. We're trying to look how we can solve the same problem all over again on multiple markets. And hoping that will eventually help us have a solution that is regional or global. And on that path, there are several levers that we are trying to handle at the operator level. So we were talking earlier about roadmap, acceleration, driving focus. Also, sometimes just making our products more accessible in this new mindset, and at the same time working with partners. So for me, there's not a one partner or one player response. It's the way. What's fundamentally changing is not only the status, I would say, of innovation that we can have now with cloud native, AI empowered 5G networks, and that at the same time, the knowledge that we can only succeed in this together. We can only succeed if we work in this as an industry to make this happen. So it's very different, I would say, from the 2G, 3G, 4G sequence. It's changing the way we stimulate innovation on the 5G SA approach.
I'm trying to answer some because we're coming already to the end of our fireside. I'm going to take a few check mark on the questions in the chatter here. Insurance, because you said also focus of verticals, and there was a question from Thomas. Do you see already insurance related use cases, maybe Otilia or Harpreet? Do you see there's use cases for the insurance industry?
I can start on that. Of course, because there's increasing fraud base and leveraging personal data. So I think that coming back to the additional security that the operator can bring in confirming data and having more secure paths for two-factor authentication, for sure that can play a strong role in fighting fraud at the moment. And at the same time, that's one of the first use cases that we are putting in motion across several markets. While we are working on more advanced network scenarios. So in terms of a key vertical or focus in 2025, fintech insurance is definitely one of the key verticals.
Okay, and then maybe one last one. I think it's quite interesting, the value of maybe off-network APIs for B2C versus B2B. Do you see everybody's talking B2B? Do you see a lot of opportunities also for the B2C segment, and which are those? Again, asking it in the group or looking also to Harpreet. Any ideas? What's your views on that take?
I think the initial, and please correct me if wrong, Otilia and Thomas, right? Initial traction in 2024, 2025 was enterprise, was B2B2, right? I think just recently B2B2C has become an interesting evolution as well. For example, fraud, identity, the fintech use cases, insurance use cases that Otilia talked about. If you didn't think about it, they are B2B, but there is also C capability involved in it. There are new use cases that we are talking, for example, for stadiums, for other verticals, which has C connection right over there. Capabilities evolving. 2025 will be a year which will actually kickstart some of the consumer market and use cases. And then potentially 2026 is when it will take off. That's at least what I'm seeing right now in the market.
Fantastic. At this point, again, I thank you all. I think it was very interesting. We'll try to wrap up at the end. I do want to give now over to my co-host Christoph, and we'll go to the next session. So now we have talked more about the use cases, the buzz, what is out there. Now giving to Christoph to go a little bit more bigger on the ecosystem play. Otilia, Thomas, Harpreet, already thank you, and I'll be back.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicolai, and thanks to the participants of this first fireside chat. Really, really interesting insights. But we want to continue. We want to talk a bit of the ecosystem play and what it actually means to make a market. And for that, I would like to welcome the second set of participants to the stage. Johanna, Director of APIs in Vodafone, George Glass, CTO of TM Forum, and Anup from Verizon's API product.
T-Mobile's.
T-Mobile, of course. Sorry for that.
Big difference.
A big difference, indeed. Good. We have learned a bit, or quite a bit, on what the APIs actually are and what we plan for monetization. But I want to bring it back to a more fundamental question. And maybe Joe, knowing that you have been involved quite intensively in Aduna and the cross-industry collaborations, the ecosystem of the APIs is broad, right? It includes the operators, it includes the hyperscalers, the developers, OEMs, etc. In your perspective and your experience, what does it actually take to create a real buzz in this ecosystem and to make sure that 1 and 1 is not 2, but 1 and 1 makes 3 or even 4?
Thanks, Christoph. I think that's a really good question. And I think, to be honest, talking to ADL or for other analysts, I think the analysts have proved from an industry point of view what it takes to create a buzz in the industry. But what I think we really need to move on is how do we create interest and buzz in the developer community? And that developer community, as we've just listed, it sits in a wide and far-reaching ecosystem. So we know there are developers who particularly like Azure or developers who like to be in AWS. We also know there are developers within the global SIs or within the enterprise. And I think that's really what is critical, is how do we understand and tap into the interest of the developer community so that we as telcos can make sure that the services that we're developing are not just useful. So a question there earlier about the insurance industry, you know, how do we understand as telco what the insurance industry needs? How can we kind of work to that opportunity? And what's key to that is collaboration, right? Creating that opportunity for us to work together, because I don't think any one of us telcos knows the answer to all of these questions, you know, every single use case or every single developer. But the more we collaborate and the more we create the opportunity for the developers themselves to come in, for industry to come in, and for us to share insight and share thinking, then I think we will start to uncover those opportunities to work together, and we'll start to be able to build services that hopefully are simple enough for the developer and other industries to be able to access. And that's really where we'll get momentum, that's where we'll get scale, and that's where we'll begin to get take up. So yeah, I think it's we've got great buzz, we've got great interest. Now we need to start really identifying those opportunities to move forward, and the key to that's collaboration.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joe. And one thing you said is the developers having the customers in mind, right? I think that will be one of the key success criteria of understanding ultimately what the industry needs. I want to dive a bit deeper there and actually pick up a question that came in from Rüdiger in the chat, and links nicely to George. When what I wanted to get to is in that ecosystem and the initial roles that GSMA have played, TM Forum have played, etc. What's the role of these standardization bodies, of these cross-operator initiatives going forward? Have they done their job and you now leave it to the open market? How do you see it? What's your plan at TM Forum?
So yeah, just to pick up on that, Christoph, I think here we actually need to get standards that will actually ensure consistency of APIs across the ecosystem. I don't want to be in the situation where I want to go and use a network API in one region and then find when I go to a different region or to a different operator, I have to use a completely different network API just because it's been defined differently in the standards. So I think there's a role to be played there between the TM Forum, GSMA, to actually drive standardization around the actual structure and implementation of the API to make it easier for the developers to consume those APIs and build services from them. I think they also, it has to be, you've got to put the APIs where the developers are. It's no point building a brand new retail store in the middle of a forest. You put a new retail store in the middle of a shopping center where all the shoppers are, and they will then come into your store and buy your goods. So we have to put the APIs into the marketplaces where the developers are. And yes, you might expose some APIs internally to get your own internal development community using them. You might expose them as an enterprise marketplace, but that will limit you geographically to where your customer base is and what access you've got to. So you've got to think on a global scale. You've got to think about putting your APIs into hyperscale marketplaces where the developers hang out, where they're looking for network services, where they want connectivity, and they're not really interested in technology, they're interested in connectivity, and they want to be able to consume services without understanding anything about the technology behind them. And that changes the nature of what a telco offers into the marketplace, and it changes the operating model that a telco works within, because they no longer own the end customer. they're now going to be providing their services into a marketplace on effectively a wholesale basis, and the consumers of those services, in many cases, they won't even know who they are or where they are, and that really upsets the telco marketplace in a way that we've probably never seen before.
Yeah, I think that is very true. And when you say we need to bring the APIs where the market is, I think it's the most natural point to hand over to Anup, because today a large share of the developers are actually US centric or are developing on US technology. How do you do it in the States? How's the ecosystem collaboration evolving between the operators, big tech, hyperscalers, and ultimately also the end users?
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge a couple of things, right? One of them is that if, as telcos, you want to play in the telco space, we need to understand the complexity of it. There's a lot of players, and how an API actually gets in the hand of a consumer or an enterprise customer may have multiple phases of actually who gets to develop what and what value gets added, right? So that requires a kind of a nuanced approach. Even if you look at the two product spaces, I think everyone talks about, one is this whole identity and security APIs, and think of like a bank as a customer. There are partners we already work with in terms of who actually provide some, consume the APIs and take it as a product stack and bring it to the bank. And that value could be an aggregation value, but it could be something that they actually add in terms of algorithms, logic, or combining data from us to somebody else's data, all of those kind of things, right? So I think one of them is like really carefully understanding the space and then making sure that we have the right ecosystem partnership in that space. I think we have to be a little bit more, I think so far, I think a lot of the talks have been about network APIs. And what we know for sure is that if I talk to a bank, they don't know anything about network API. They don't care. What they want to hear about is that, oh, what are my identity and security and fraud prevention challenges? And what data or signals do you have uniquely to enable this? That is kind of the starting point, I think, what we're seeing in those kind of spaces, because the problem sets are very clear. And there is also kind of a clear understanding that we have solutions, right? But that's very different in QoD and so on. So I don't want to get into that example, but I think the understanding of the nuances of the ecosystem is, and really being customer focused is kind of the big starting point.
Very interesting. And Anup, if I may double click on that, and if we're very critical and we see some of the commentary on the Aduna and the Network API Alliance, etc., is that there is an over reliance on Camara APIs. How do you see that towards your customers? How do you see that in the ecosystem? Is it true? Are we missing actually a relevant part of the market, or are we starting at the right place?
So I just want to contextualize Camara APIs in the broader standardization work, right? I hear as much from customers complaining about I have to sign 3 very different sign-up contracts and kind of a negotiation framework for the carriers in US as much as an API. Sometimes API standardization is lower in their priority than, oh, are you asking my customers to sign a 3-party agreement with you and me and so on? Okay, that's not a non-starter, right? So I have to think about how ease of doing business as kind of the main vector we want to actually drive towards, and then API standardization and so on is kind of one element that can actually drive that part.
Joe, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it comes back to what George was saying. So Camara is the current space where we're collaborating to build APIs for developers, right? To Anup's point, I don't think it matters necessarily that it's Camara. What matters is that we build a product that the developer consumer can use, and we all build it the same way. So what's important in this space is consensus, and that the product we come up with is viable and it works for the consumer. So yeah, I think currently Camara is doing well to sort of try and galvanize industry behind, this is how we build network APIs, this is what we do. If something comes into portfolio and a different standards body or a different collaboration forum has come up with the design, and that's what works for the customer, and we all galvanize behind that, fantastic. I mean, that's just as positive. So I think the key thing is that ultimately everybody in industry is aligned, and to Anup's point, where everybody is producing services that make it easy for the developers to consume, and that we're not introducing more complexity that needs to be remedied further down the track.
Fantastic. I think we laid the foundation nicely on the development of the APIs, on what standards we build them, and ultimately how I make them available. The second part of the equation is obviously how do we monetize, right? And again, I think if we want to be successful as an industry, we need to think about monetization in the larger ecosystem. And as Nicolai in the fireside chat before alluded, there's different monetization strategies that operators can follow. And maybe there, Anup, looping you in again, what's Timo's approach? Are you planning to engage developers directly? Are you planning to, as George said, be on different marketplaces? Are you going to do both? How are you going to address, and how do you make use of the ecosystem as such?
So there's not like a one-size-fits-all approach here, right? I think there are some spaces where we see that a package solution that's enabled by an API is kind of the way to actually maximize value and make it easy for an enterprise that's our customer to consume the API, right? Then the API is an enabler rather than kind of being the end product that the enterprise directly buys. There is that motion for sure. There is also a motion where we have a more like a sell-through model where we actually kind of partner with ISVs or partners who actually consume our APIs, build a solution, and then that gets monetized either by them or by us, right, to our enterprise customer. Then the third piece is, of course, the fact that, there are actually kind of marketplaces / aggregators and the product, like a few folks who are really actually building their own developer platform who can actually consume our API, either offer it directly by adding some value or kind of building their own products and going, right? So kind of like sell through, sell with, sell to, all those models have to be actually tried out. And it really depends on customer type, their ability to build something or consume a package solution, and finally, actually the product space itself, right, where the value is actually being generated.
Great. Just picking up a question there and throwing it at Joe and George. Philippe is asking, are operators actually equipped to work with developer communities? Are they there? Can they monetize? Maybe Joe from an operator, and then George from
I'm happy to answer, and Anup's answer may be different to mine, but I think I would say as Vodafone, we know our limitations. So I don't think we are, right? In terms of truly building a DevRel community, really encouraging the wider scale of the developers to talk to us directly, investing in that relationship, that in itself is an industry. That is an art, right? That is something that you need to really get behind. And doing that just for building a network API business for where we are now, I don't think would be a developer-led, a customer-led approach, right? So from our point of view, very akin to Anup, we will go where the developers already are and have a conversation with them there, right? Whether that's via other channels, whether that's, putting our services into the hyperscalers or the SIs. I think we absolutely are happy if a developer were to come direct to Vodafone, that we will engage with them. But I think we absolutely acknowledge that will be in the minority, not least because I don't think we believe that there are hundreds of millions of developers who have a sort of latent, desperate demand for network APIs. It's something that we need to culture, we need to educate, we need to kind of talk on their terms. We need to, all of that work takes resource, investment, and honing. And I think we certainly intend to do that through a myriad of partners rather than invest, scaling up to the level of DevRel that we know others do far better than we.
I would build on what Johanna says there, and I absolutely agree with her. I don't think the telcos, from what I see around the world, are actually equipped to talk to developers. And also, I don't think they should be. If you go into an AWS marketplace to download an API, you don't talk to anybody from AWS because the API describes itself in such a way that you know what it's going to do and you download and you use it. And we have to have that mindset around our APIs. But I also think we have to be very careful that we keep talking about network APIs. And I think Anup referred to it or alluded to it. Bankers are not interested in telco networks, but if we can provide them a guaranteed accurate location service because of some feature of the network that we can expose through a location API where we're using the network to accurately determine exactly where a customer is or a user of the service is, then I can do things like two-factor authentication where I actually only ask the user to to provide one of the pieces of data, and the network location services provides the second piece behind the scenes without the user realizing, so I can offer a secure service. And that's an example where you're taking a network API or a network capability. You could monetize that because you're going to charge for a secure service or an authenticated service, but the person that's consuming the service doesn't care less whether it's a network API or I'm using some other voodoo magic to work out where the person is. I'm just accurately able to tell you exactly where the person is. And that's a very useful piece of information if I'm trying to do some two-factor authentication type services.
Can I add like I don't know it's how contrarian it is to what George and Joe says. I think it's kind of along the lines too, right? I think there are two myths, I think, when we come to talk about it. One of them is that, oh, somehow telco APIs have to be and will be as seamless as going to AWS and consuming a network orchestration API from AWS, right? Or a fraud service from AWS. But the reality of it, at least in the US market, is that it's not going to be. We are a very highly regulated company. We have much more higher bar to clear in terms of how we expose our data and so on. So we have to actually kind of put in commercial constructs in place that kind of adds friction, right? Let's put it that way, right? So I think we have to set expectations of what good looks like. It's not going to be go click on a portal and get the API and you're good to go, right? At least not commercial scale, that's not going to happen, right? So the second one I would also kind of comment on is that from our experience, I think, is that it's all about quality, not quantity, right? It's not about 1 million developers. It's about like 10 to 20 to 100 strategic partners who actually consume the API, where most of the growth is going to come from. And we have had really good success actually working with partners in different spaces who are really working with us directly. And we haven't really found as much challenge actually figuring it out how we talk to them or convince them about the value, because they are much more pointed, direct conversation we need to do. But if you want to play in the other space, of course, we would have much more challenge, right? It's just about being realistic about where we are as an industry and what we are actually trying to accomplish, I would say.
Can I just build on Anup's point there? And this is a really, really important point. We run a thing called a Catalyst program in the forum where you actually demonstrate and test working software. And we looked at the quality of service on demand, Camara API, and demonstrated that working. But exactly to Anup's point, whenever we talk to it with an operator where you're actually going to boost the speed and reduce the latency of a connection, the operator that we talked to said, well, hold on a minute. First of all, you've got to check, have I got spare capacity? Second, you've got to check, can I charge the person that's going to try and do this boost for boosting the service because they're using more of my network resources? And whenever they do the boost, can I actually then send them a bill or monetize the network API? And suddenly you found whenever you had a single quality of service on demand network API, we actually had an ecosystem of 17 API calls that sat around it, because of regulation, because of trust, because of capacity, to actually manage that API so it could be safely used. So it's not just about exposing raw network capabilities and hoping that developers will come and pick them up. They have to be used in context. And in a highly regulated environment like telco, that context is absolutely paramount that we get it right.
Yeah, very, very good discussion. I think we're really getting to the core of it, what it means to orchestrate the ecosystem and create a market. And I really liked your really also self-reflective views on actually, if I was to simplify the value chain and where operators think they can make a mark. Looking ahead, and we have spoken a lot now about what we try to do and how this will foster, how this will ignite the industry. Having seen though many of such endeavors probably being not as successful as everybody was hoping, for us as a community, how would we measure success in this? What would really constitute a landmark project or a landmark win for the ecosystem as such? Joe, knowing that you also have background from big tech, what do you think the customers expect from us to really consider what we have done a success?
Yeah, I think there's two things for me, and one contributes to the other, right? So the measure of success for me is adoption. that's really seeing the services utilized, adding value, key parts of journeys, etc. Like that for me is a key success metric, really driving that innovation that we talked about. But even the simplest things, right? Some of these network services, they just simplify journeys, or they make things, kind of easier, right? And I think seeing that adoption on a global scale would be, a success for us as industry, and having them integrated into others. But I think what underpins that really is scale, right? And whenever we talk about the topic, we have, a number of big operators. You've got 3 huge operators on the call, on the webinar today, right? But actually, for these services to be successful, wherever digital companies require coverage, a bank, for example, or an insurance company, they need all of a market. And then if they're in multiple markets, they need all of those markets. And so I think this will be a real test of our ability to truly collaborate as industry, right the way through from the big boys down to kind of solo market players, or, kind of smaller operators, because a lot of the digital brands that we're talking to and that we're working with, they operate in multiple markets. And so they're super engaged in the services, but if it doesn't work, if they only have one operator out of a market, or they have one in Europe but they don't have another, or they have US but not Europe, these are the places where we start to not be able to meet the customer's needs if they've got one app, for example, deployed globally. So for me, adoption is the key, starting to see these improvements to the customer journey, because ultimately that's what it's all about. We're enabling new services, but we have to crack scale, we have to crack execution. Otherwise, I just don't think we'll get that.
Anup, any US specificities, anything that you would add?
Yeah, I think for us, it's always a question about, have we proven that there is value being created for the end customer, right? So that's kind of the biggest success measure, right? So, and that could be a measure of like how many customers we reach to, or it could be actually how many customers are actually finding enough value in terms of the quality of the value, right? So just specifically in US market, for example, if you can actually satisfy a problem for top 10 banks in US, you have created a tremendous amount of value, right? So it's just 10 customers you're really trying to address, and maybe a couple of problem statements per bank, right? So then can we actually prove with our products in our portfolio that we have creating the value? That's the biggest question we're trying to answer, because that will then kind of point us towards what scale can we aspire to, and what kind of, challenges we can overcome. They all kind of come from actually that.
And George, from an industry association point of view, how would you define success? When would your members be happy?
So from my perspective, it's about consumption. Are the APIs, how many have been built? How many have been used? And Anup talked about a sell through, a sell with, and a sell to model for the APIs. Well, whenever Johanna and Anup can show me $1 million of revenue from the APIs, whether they're through, sell with, or sell to, then I'll start to believe that they've monetized the APIs. So we know how to sell to, because that's the B2C model, and we do lots of that as telcos. The sell with and the sell through are much more difficult markets for us to crack. And to get to the scale globally, you have to go into the sell to and the sell with. That's how you get scale. And you've got to make sure that you can collect, even if it's a couple of cents per API call or whatever you're going to collect around the world, some way that you can then say, I'm making money out of my APIs. Then I'll know that it's been a success.
Fantastic, great words. And looking at the time, at least for that fireside chat, I'll need to wrap it up. And if I was trying to summarize what we just discussed now over the last 25 minutes, I think it's clear this needs to be an ecosystem play. I think operators understand where their strengths are in this process. I think operators also, as Joe and Anup outlined, understand where collaboration, where sell through and sell with will be key to drive this. And ultimately that we all want to be measured on the same thing, which is adoption and traffic, and ultimately monetization of APIs, to make this more than a really powerful announcement that all the operators have made. And I'm sure that will be reinforced at MWC. with that, thank you very much, Joe, George, and Anup from Timo. Obviously, thank you very much for joining. And I'll give it back to Nico.
Fantastic. That was great, guys. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the discussion and some great insights being shared. We have a couple of minutes left in order trying to wrap up, and I take the first liberty of trying to give it a thought or a first trial of wrapping up the entire discussion. So what did I learn, right? We do have solutions for existing problems out there in the market. So network APIs can really solve market problems at very different maturity grades, the different network APIs behind it, with aviation, authentication, fraud, for different verticals. But there's still a couple of crucial things missing. We talked, I think, at length about very interesting, about the developer community and the honest self-reflection of the telcos. We are probably not there yet. We talked about in both of the fireside chats, I believe, quite extensively about the customer focus. We really rooted. We need to focus on the customer. Where is the value? What can we really do more? What does it enable us? We highlighted the ease of doing business. I think both on the technical, where of course the standardization is playing a key role. Yes, even if it's a standard, it still needs to be easy to consume technically, as well as also on the business side, the ease of doing businesses. If you always need to involve more and more parties, that will kill any business case as well. So that's part. And lastly, I think the biggest question mark, which was interesting that really we had this honesty, I believe, in that discussion. I'm sure we'll be interested to hear your reflection, Christoph, and also Harpreet, what you took away, is that the monetization is really the honest self-reflection. Yes, we don't know, right? Otilia mentioned we will focus, we need to identify repeatable problems and then really make sure that we scale this. Scale was a topic, collaboration was a topic, but everybody was still, hey, we're still not there. We really need to still figure out how to really monetize it at scale, but there's a lot of elements to build on. That was a little bit of my take. Harpreet, Christoph, what did you take away?
So the topics that everybody brought up were right? They're realities of life. They are realities of service product. For example, network engineering, you cannot just ignore it. Compliance, you cannot ignore it. The capacity planning, you cannot ignore it. The capabilities of monetization. If you are actually using 1 gig of data on a red node channel versus 1 gig on a premium, on a demand at a QoD, definitely you're taking something away. There are different models and capabilities that needs to build out it. So it's an ecosystem play, as we've all been talking about. Kamara did us a favor by kickstarting us. Aruna did us a favor by creating the FOMO in the market right now. I think what everybody's talking about is we need to have a few success cases. For identity and fraud was a great year. Like, it was a great start in 2024. Similar kickstarts we need to have in the future. All of these APIs are a starting point. We need an aggregated, authored, simplified APIs for consumption and utilization from the marketplace. And that's what I think everybody's talking about. How do we build that ecosystem and kickstart it, and then move forward on that?
Yeah, great reflections from both of you. Maybe 1 or 2 considerations to add. So what I really took away is that I think all the ecosystem participants, and we had here from the operators to providers to use case companies, I think understand that this is really making a market and that collaboration is required, and that also everybody seems to understand where in which parts of the value chain they ultimately want to play and where the strength and development areas are. So I think that's a fantastic start. What I also really enjoyed and took away here is that everybody seems to have the same goal in mind, and that is making sure the adoption of network APIs is the key objective over the next years. And be that Kamara, be that any other forum, I think as George said very well, it needs to serve the purpose of the customer, and the customer needs to be the first priority in mind for all those developments. And I think that's typically a very, very good start. Have the customer in mind, and then everything.
Would we just into one view from the two of you? Kind of, we all have scarce resources. We all know that. So we all have our scarce resources. There's always a lack of time. If you were an operator, where would you put your main focus, right? So there's building an ecosystem, trying to identify what capabilities do we even have, how do I identify, abstract them, expose them, talking to my customers, trying to build proof cases, talking to my other operators in my countries in order to launch a countrywide identity fraud anti-fraud APIs. How do you prioritize this? And I'm just like, I'm really also, because there's a lot to do, right? So I can be very, very busy here. That's also very clear. But I also want to, where do I place my bets? And what's your view? Where is the most pressing issue to work on?
So if I was to go, I think it's creating lighthouses. The moment this whole concept of network APIs becomes more concrete and less abstract, I think the faster you will ultimately be able to drive adoption.
All right.
I think all of us have our own key strengths, and recognizing that key strength to educate the market, to create the market, to create the monetization is critical, right? So this is why I think the ecosystem play, which has just happened in the last 3-4 years, is very, very critical for all of us. We are all doing our share of educating the market, the prospective enterprises, the prospective consumer application developers, and so on and so forth, on what the value is of this so-called network API capabilities and so forth. For example, Anup talked about it, right? So the thing is to move away from just being a just being a pipe to actually provide value to the banks. If he can address 10 top banks in the United States, that's a tangible business. But that takes education. That requires skill sets and effort. And of course, Anup can't do it on his own. He has a large team that can help him on the segmentation and so forth. But then there is an ecosystem play that we need to actually leverage and build on that. So to answer your question, Nicolai, we need to all identify our strengths. We need to create the partners. Otilia talked about it. Johanna talked about it. Creating that ecosystem of partners. Johanna was very, very clear. I really loved her answer when she said, I don't think I can actually go after the developer networks myself. But if she can, if there is an opportunity for people like us to help her create that ecosystem, maybe there's an opportunity for us to stimulate the market and move forward. So prioritization is important. I completely understand. There are certain pushes in the Mobile World Congress last year as well on a certain type of APIs which didn't catch on. It's a large group of set of capabilities that network can provide, identifying the customer, identifying the target market, identifying the opportunities, educating the market by examples, not by PowerPoint. Right? Actually doing something tangible is important.
Let's in that sense, I think that's a beautiful ending. I really enjoyed this discussion. I hope to all who are watching, you took something away for it from your own part. I just encourage you also to connect with the speakers. I think everybody is open. We are all here in order to really make this market collaboration. We need to collaborate. We need to get learnings in quickly, share failures, share best practices, identify, as Otilia said, the value, then replicate it, make it bigger. So the more and the more successful we are, I think the better for all of us. We will make this webinar also available for those who thought, hey, maybe one of my colleagues should watch this, or if you want to do it, then watch it again. Also happy to do that. We do that one. Everybody who has been registered for the webinar will get the link. And otherwise, I think we will do something like this again. I really enjoyed it. The speakers, everybody, you were really fantastic. I enjoyed it a lot. Christoph, last word to you.
No, thank you very much. It is an ecosystem play. Let's all work together to make this a success. Thank you so much for your time.
Fantastic. Everybody, have a great one. Thank you. Bye-bye.